Ladies and gentlemen, this is the 12th and final round.
Right hand, Golovkin steps in and down he goes again. Unbelievable. Mayweather makes him pay. What a rookie mistake. A sensational left hook by De La Hoya.
It's facts. I'm the best. You know what I mean? Sometimes I don't want to believe it myself, but it's the truth. I'm the best. I'm going to show you how great I am.
From Southern California, this is the Last Round Podcast.
Welcome back to episode 214 of the Last Round Podcast. Thank you again for joining us, whether you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Audio Boom, wherever you're at, however you're listening. We appreciate it each and every week. And this week, our special guest of the week, he is the combat sports editor for the Sporting News since about 2021. And prior to working for the Sporting News, he provided insight on combat sports for Fightful and also Fight Sports and Wrestling Inc. or Incorporated. Maybe he'll elaborate on that, whether it's Inc. or Incorporated. Daniel Yanofsky joins us on the Last Round for the first time ever here on the show. Thank you for joining us, Daniel.
Thank you for having me, guys. And I think it's just Wrestling Inc. They didn't quite explain that much to me, but that's maybe a trade secret.
It could be. I'm sure we'll do some digging in the near future, try to find it out. But I've seen the name before. I was like, do they call it Incorporated or Inc.? But it's a little tidbit for the future. So Daniel, before we kind of jump into our regular news and notes and reviews and previews of what's going on in this crazy sport called boxing, let's get a little background on you for some listeners who might not be aware of who exactly you are, but they want to know how you got involved in the sport and how you got to where you're at today. So let's just start with this question. Were you always interested in the media side, the journalistic side of the entire sport, or in general, the journalism side of life?
I would say yes. I was always a writer when I was younger. I never did journalism, I would say, in Ithaca, where I went to school. I did some classes, but not really the major. But I was always someone who was curious. Right? Yes. Very cold up there. Love it.
Yeah, got it. I think every time I remember Ithaca, I remember Road Trip, the movie. So that's why I remember it.
You're not the first one. You won't be the last. And people always say university it was college, but people always say university, and I'm like, I wish it was like that. But it was definitely a great experience there. But I was a part of their radio program, and I was always interested in talking to people and writing information. People always said I was a schmoozer, my parents most included on that one. But I decided that during my time in Ithaca, I would just explore the idea of doing sports. And after college, I was just exploring to see what I would do next. I happened to get an opportunity to join a podcast to talk about the Mets, my favorite baseball team, as I'm originally from New York. And it just happened to blow up from there, where I happened to join this organization where I got to talk about first pro wrestling, because that was my first favorite sport. My friends were always into it, and I never was. Then I got down the line for that. Then they were into MMA, and I wasn't. And then I was, because, it intertwined with combat sports. Actually, my first major fight that I really watched was Holly Holm versus Ronda Rousey. And I just was looking at that fight recap, or the recap before the fight, and I saw that Holm should win this fight. The emotions of Rousey were getting to her. Holm was just doing whatever she could just to stay as calm as possible. And I thought her skills are better than Ronda's, and I could see that happening. So I got invested in writing about that when nobody else was. And lo and behold, Holly Holm won. And after that, I thought that why not boxing? Because MMA, pro wrestling, cover a third combat sport. And it just so happens that I had a true passion for it because of the nature surrounding the sweet science, and especially women's boxing, that got me really interested in covering the sport.
So, as I mentioned in the introduction, you've been the combat sports editor for Sporting News for about a little over 2 years, maybe, or coming up on 2 years, around that time frame. How did you get to the Sporting News?
Well, I actually started in December 2022. December 2020. Yeah, December 2022.
Not 2021.
Sorry, 2021. I'm so sorry about that.
I was like, that's a big. I was like, we had notes, and we're like, oh, did we write the wrong number? So.
Oh no, that's my bad. So I was just freelancing around for like a long period of time. I was able to get a job that I wanted in New Jersey, and then COVID hit, and just wild circumstances surrounding that. I decided to go to Florida to be with my family, and so was freelancing a little bit more. Got to work at Wrestling Inc. As well as Fightful definitely for a longer period of time. And then I initially interviewed with Sporting News not long, and it wasn't a good fit the first time. But then an opportunity came up where we can talk about combat sports, and I took that opportunity and was able to grab it and make sure I was able to keep it this time. And I was very grateful for the chance to prove myself to the Sporting News, and here I am today covering all forms of combat sports, from YouTube boxing to women's boxing to MMA to WrestleMania this weekend, and Anthony Joshua, Jermaine Franklin.
Going back when as a kid, I know you said that you kind of fell into like MMA. You mentioned Ronda Rousey, Holly Holm, and professional wrestling and all that. You kind of grew into those to become a fanatic of those sports. Did you have any favorite fighters, any favorite boxers growing up, maybe when you were a kid?
Not entirely. I wasn't too interested as a kid. It only dawned on me later in life, and that's where I became really interested in Amanda Nunes, Anderson Silva, GSP. A few boxers coming to mind: Marvelous Marvin Hagler. After watching a few documentaries with my dad and my mom, but. Generally speaking, I got into Miguel Cotto even later in his career, but I could be considered a late bloomer, but I'm always a learner as well. So even while I developed late, you could say, in the combat sports game, always willing to learn, always willing to appreciate what the past has done to present towards the future.
Got it. So where does the future hold for you right now? Is it Sporting News? I mean, obviously you're with Sporting News, but does it seem like you'll be with them for quite a few years going forward?
I mean, I hope so. I'm actually rubbing my head for good luck. I'm bald, for those who don't know, so rubbing it for good luck. But years ago, my first UFC event I ever covered, people mistook me for Ariel Helwani. And I just said, no, I'm just another bald guy in a suit. I spoke to Luke Thomas and Ariel on the elevator during that fight night, and they said, just roll with it. And I figured, okay, I can be the next Ariel Helwani, because that has happened 2 more times at different events where people have mistook me for Ariel. And I could do that, or I could say, I'm going to be the next Dan Yanofsky. So wherever that leads, I'm willing to go whatever it takes to do, to be in front of media, to be in the camera, but to be writing wherever it may be. And that may be with Sporting News. I definitely hope it is, and we'll have to wait and see. But I'm very positive Sporting News and I will have a fruitful relationship for a long period of time.
Did you ever have a moment, especially when you started covering events, whether it was MMA, maybe pro wrestling or boxing, when you started getting access to these events, whether it's press conferences, fights, or anything like that, media events, did you ever have a moment where you kind of felt, I guess, starstruck, or you kind of had to pinch yourself and say, oh, wow, like Miguel Cotto's right there, or so-and-so's right there, Anthony Joshua's right there, or something like that?
I would definitely say my first encounter with Deontay Wilder. I got to watch him during the Luis Ortiz fight in Brooklyn, the first one. And it was just a fantastic comeback. I believe Alicia Napoleon was on that fight card. And that's where she comes into play later, actually, where Deontay Wilder just made that fantastic comeback. And I just thought, wow, this is the most amazing experience. I forgot who it was, but there was like a famous 90s rapper there that was like the hottest thing then. And she just happened to perform for Wilder. And I got to see her after the show. Another moment would probably be Anthony Joshua versus Andy Ruiz. That moment in general, that fight night was just something that I'll never forget for the rest of my life. But really, the starstruck moment, I guess you could say, was Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano. That is the only moment I will say that I can tell my kids about, my grandkids about, because I've been waiting 5 years for that fight, and I'm a true passionate fan of women's boxing. And to see them up on their stage, Jake Paul, Eddie Hearn, one of the best dressed men in boxing besides me, obviously, Becky Lynch, Bianca Belair, Clarissa Shields, all of them were there, and the celebrities were out that entire week. And it just felt like one by one, everyone who I just knew from my childhood or grew up watching or just watched today, they're just there in front of me. And I was grateful for that moment to work it, to be a part of it, to witness history, but also just to be in the moment.
Dan, and be honest, when you were mistaken for Ariel Helwani, how many autographs did you sign pretending to be Ariel, and how many free drinks did you get?
About 2 autographs and 10 free drinks.
Please tell me that's true.
I wish it was true. I wish. I'm sorry. I cannot tell a lie there, but it would have been. They were trying to hand me drinks. I will say, because there were a lot of inebriated people at this UFC event, and they definitely tried. But I knew I was trying to be responsible and working at the time. So
yeah. No,
I'm surprised. I listened to Ariel. I follow MMA. If they thought you were Ariel Helwani, I'm surprised they didn't throw you out.
I didn't do anything wrong that time, so I think if they thought I was him, they would give me another chance. So I'm actually happy for that I wasn't Ariel Helwani in that sense.
Right.
Now, imagine what a moment that would be if you were at a UFC event and then Dana White walks by like, Ariel, what the hell? What are you doing here? You're just like, no, that's not me, man. Like,
that's the other bald guy.
Right.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into our regularly scheduled fight reviews here. Going back to this past Saturday, the 25th of March, from the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada, on Showtime pay-per-view. David Benavidez remains undefeated at 27-0 with a 12-round unanimous decision win over Canelo-Plant, who takes the second loss of his professional career. Benavidez is now the interim super middleweight champion of the world. Benavidez won by scores of 115-113, 116-112, and 117-111. Dan, tell us your breakdown. What did you think about this fight?
I had it 115-113 as well for Benavidez. I thought that Plant was tough as nails during this fight. I did think that he used his combinations pretty well at the beginning, but Benavidez's power is just too much. And his size, his reach was just something that is to marvel at. And it's crazy to think that someone with, a past history of drug use or couldn't make weight, he was motivated enough to just look better in this fight. Healthy-wise, he looked great. Physically, emotionally, mentally, even if there was a lot of fighting going on surrounding them before the fight. And I just thought that him outlanding Canelo-Plant throughout the later rounds was just an incredible idea, because I initially had Canelo-Plant. If it went the distance, I had Canelo-Plant winning, which it did, but I had it because of his durability, his unique boxing IQ. But in this case, Benavidez just stormed back, used his power, outgunned Canelo-Plant, and just was the smartest man in the room somehow to secure the win. I thought it was one of the most impressive wins he'll ever have up until he potentially faces Canelo.
Mike, what do you think about the fight?
I think it went a way a lot of people thought. A lot of people said, they thought Benavidez late round stoppage, and it was exactly that. Caleb-Plant early on looked really good, very stylish, kind of moving, not letting Benavidez get set and firing those big shots. But I don't know whether he just kind of tired, because I think it was probably from the 5th round onwards, Benavidez just really took over. And Caleb-Plant has one unbelievable chin, because just in those late rounds, everybody was all over Twitter. I was kind of checking it at the same time as watching, and everyone was just like, oh my God, that chin. And I thought he still looked good, though. Good fight. I'd love to see it again later down the line if they both get some more wins. And come back and revisit it. But yeah, Benavidez is definitely one of the better performances from him, because I did think in some of his other fights that he was a little bit too flat-footed. But I think now looking at it, it was probably just he knew in some of those fights that those people couldn't hurt him, and he was just going to like walk them down and take them out when he was flat-footed because he wanted that extra power. But yeah, it's definitely a good performance from him, and a good performance from Caleb-Plant. It's one of those fights where I think even though he lost, he came out looking a little bit better than he did before because of the unbelievable chin that he had. I think maybe put some more glow back on him because of the fact when he was fighting Canelo and he was like, I'm doing good, aren't I? And he was kind of like looking for some like gratitude from Canelo, kind of made him look a little bit soft. But then going into this one and having the unbelievable chin that he did and, not giving up and going out on his shield, I thought it was a good fight for both of them.
Daniel, what do you think that if Caleb-Plant, if his power was just a little bit higher, do you think it could have been a different outcome? Because I think everybody had a consensus and agreement in terms of thinking that Benavidez was the stronger fighter, strength-wise and all that. But Plant seemed like he might have had the better boxing IQ overall. But like you mentioned, like we talked about, Benavidez just, eventually just found his way in. First 5-6 rounds, maybe he was getting outboxed. Plant was kind of outboxing him, kind of clinching and all that. We'll touch on Kenny Bayless right now, what you thought about that. But do you think if Caleb-Plant maybe had a little bit more power, it could have been an easier path to victory for him against somebody like Benavidez?
I won't deny that. The same thing happened with Canelo. Canelo was a harder puncher than Plant. And Plant, you saw with Terrell, is a very good power hitter when he wants to be. In this case, his boxing IQ got the best of him. He wanted to fight inside. He wanted to be a little cute dancing around the ring, but he was aggressive. But was he too aggressive? I would say no. And that's where maybe down the line, something to look into for him to improve on. But you have a great point where power is key. Even if you're the best boxer out there, you need your power. And that's where I think he lacked a little bit. But at the end of the day, it was one of the best fights you'll see, and he held up his end.
Do you agree or disagree with what Mike brought up, which was an interesting take to say that even though Plant was on the losing end of this, he also still came out of this fight with some type of victory because, if you look at his record and like with, I think the Showtime crew and some other crews in the media touched on, his 2 professional losses as a professional are against 2 of the best fighters in the world, I guess you could say, when Canelo Alvarez and Benavidez now. Did he come out with still, a lot of confidence going forward, or did this hurt him in his career?
I wouldn't say it hurt his career. It definitely hurt where he stands in the rankings of the super middleweight division. But I do think that it was a moral victory. You could say that about Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury. Jake Paul lost, but it was a moral victory. I think that Caleb-Plant looked better than anyone could have guessed, especially towards the later rounds when Benavidez took over. But to say that it affects his career in a negative way, I would say no. It's just, what are you going to do next for him now that he's no longer a contender? Now, what's interesting is Damian Lillard tweeted out not too long ago, Caleb-Plant versus Edgar Berlanga next. I think Plant, top-level fighter, just fought 2 guys who were on that same level and were better that night. I mean, if he wants to play matchmaker, that's fine by me. But you have to do something with Plant. Maybe go back to basics. Maybe just fight another tough guy. That's up to him to decide what he wants to do. But I think that his career trajectory is not down. It's up, but it's also in a little bit of purgatory, like Anthony Joshua a little bit.
Is Plant the 3rd best 168-pounder in the world behind Canelo Alvarez and Benavidez right now?
Yes.
I agree with that as well. And then focusing on the referee, Kenny Bayless. Here's my take on it, and you both tell me what you think. But when I saw the reporting of Kenny Bayless and the judges were going to be assigned this fight, I mean, it's not like Kenny Bayless is a brand new judge. You know, he's been around and there's enough content out there for us, enough fights for us to see how he does it. You know, Mayweather always preferred Kenny Bayless most of the time. So, I mean, and I get it, you know, people watch these fights and stuff like that, and Caleb-Plant was, I guess, if you want to call it tactical or strategical, he would kind of get into a clinch to kind of stop the momentum, which was honestly, you know, if the referee's letting you do it, and especially against a bigger guy and it's stopping the momentum, you know, is it really that, you know, it's kind of part of the game, right? Is it your fault as a fighter if the referee's not telling you to stop or to like deducting a point? But what did you think, Daniel, about Kenny Bayless's, I guess, performance in that fight?
I mean, it's not probably the worst performance by a referee that you could really ever tell. I've seen a lot of MMA fights that are really bad. Have you ever seen pro wrestling? The referee is always like distracted, but that's besides the point on that. I've seen, I think it was Anthony Joshua versus Joseph Parker, where the referee was holding on to them a little bit too much. And I think that at that given point, you just have to think to yourself, okay, the referee isn't making it about himself like baseball umpires, but it is a distraction towards the sport. It is a distraction towards the match. Does he mean well? Probably. Does he think he knows what he's doing? Yes. But affecting the outcome is always going to happen in combat sports, and we can't do anything about it. Now, would he be able to speak to the media and actually address the situation, what he saw, what he dictated, how he saw the fight going, and why he decided to do what he did? That would be great. I think that is what the sport needs in order to grow and in order for fans and media alike to say, okay, maybe he had a point.
Mike, what'd you think?
I thought he could have stopped it earlier, told him to stop it, break him. If he keeps doing it, then, take him aside, give him a formal warning in front of the entire crowd. If he carries on doing it, then deduct a point. But he kind of just didn't really want to get involved. And I understand that. It's a big fight. And the last thing we really want is the fight to be decided by the referee. You don't really, really want to get involved in huge fights like that unless you really, really have to. But he just kept kind of like breaking him, and he was too slow to do it. And then sometimes he would do it at the wrong time. It seemed like they were about to kind of work it out, and he would jump in and do that. So he needed to kind of make his mind up early on and establish what exactly he was going to do, and then just stick with that. It didn't affect the result, and we're kind of talking about something small. Nobody got hurt or anything like that. Fingers crossed. That was obviously. That's the worst thing, is when somebody's getting hurt, like in MMA, like Dan was saying, and then we're talking about a referee letting an opponent take, a substantial beating. Whereas here, the right person won. We're talking about small, minute things, something that he could have done just to have been a little bit better during the fight. So I think we can kind of just sweep it under the rug a little bit. I think it's not huge. It didn't affect the outcome of the fight. So let's just let it be, I guess,
Daniel, if Kenny Bayless, like Mike said, did give a firm warning, let's just say within first couple rounds, like in front of the whole crowd, very visible warning to Plant and, whatever, to kind of say, hey, look, here's your firm warning. This is what I'm going to do if you do it again, deduct point, blah, 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 blah. Do you think Benavidez would have stopped him before the 12th round?
I was unsure to say. You never really know where a boxer's mindset is. And so if they're not having to worry about the referee, then maybe not. If they are, it's a 50-50 split. So at the end of the day, whatever the referee decides, the fighter has to take it upon themselves to either act upon it or not. And I think Benavidez, with his emotions and Plant's emotions, I think that it wouldn't have really changed the entire outcome of the fight. I think he would have been a little bit more aggressive. But I think he was playing tactical against a tactical fighter. And I think that's what he needed to do the most, because he can go for the knockout early. But if you've seen Plant fight, he's not going to allow him to do that. If you saw him survive all that onslaught, if that's him giving 100% and still surviving, Plant was, then what does that say about Benavidez and his ability to knock his opponent out like that? It's just a slippery slope that you don't know until it's too late.
What's your take on how, fans and obviously some media alike, because, it's natural to do it in terms of comparison when, like for this fight, for example, saying, oh, well, Benavidez got a unanimous decision or a decision win against Caleb-Plant and Canelo Alvarez knocked him out. There's some people who compare fights like that for the similar opponent. Do you do that? I mean, how do you view something like that? For example, Benavidez going to a decision with Plant, but Canelo knocking him out. Does that make sense, or is it kind of like, it doesn't really matter that much?
It makes sense for people to think it at that time, but when you really look forward to it at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter because those are two different fighters, two different styles. One could be the same fighter against the other, but you never really know. Like if Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano, Katie Taylor could have been knocked out in the 5th or 6th round if there were 3-minute rounds in women's boxing. But I'm not going to think about that now because that fight already happened. People do that. I sometimes do, but it's hard to do that because it's an unfair representation of the fight. It's unfair representation of what the fighters do, what they've accomplished over their careers. And it just it's not healthy. So you can do it, great, but you're going to have to suck it up a little bit and then move on and focus on the next fight and then see, comparing down the line, especially when someone retires, what was the difference in that and their performances.
Speaking of focusing in on the next fight, obviously the talk has been Benavidez, Canelo. Me personally, I did appreciate that, like Benavidez. I don't know if he said it prior or in the post fight or something, but because sometimes there's narratives that you build in boxing, saying, "Oh, so and so's ducking, so and so just ducked this guy because he fought this guy instead." And there's a narrative out there saying Canelo was ducking Benavidez, but I saw, and I'm sure he said it in multiple interviews, but I saw one specific interview where they asked Benavidez, "Hey, do you feel Canelo's ducking you? Is he going to fight you after this, or is he going to duck you?" And he even said, no, I don't think he's ducking me at all. He's like, I'm paraphrasing, but he says something along the lines of, he's like, I think he just has so many options. Then, I'm just trying to build myself up to get to that top spot and become the number one option, which I think was a perfect answer for that. But I don't think we see it in September, because since Canelo's already said that he wants to fight Bivol and he wants to go back up to 175 and try to get that rematch, which, I don't think it's a good idea, but, he wants to do it. He's a warrior guy. But do we see Canelo-Benavidez in May of 2024?
We should see it in September, but if we are waiting that long, then yes, I think we will. I think that people who are very much wrong in saying that Bivol that Benavidez is an easy fight for Canelo. I think that Benavidez is a tougher fight for Canelo than anybody else. Yes, he lost to Bivol. He's going to probably lose to Bivol again. And let's be honest here, he will. But it's only because of the weight difference and the surgery that he just recently went through. I think that Benavidez, Canelo in 2024 by itself, I think that's a great idea. Should it happen this year? Yes. But if we're planning ahead for the boxing schedule, because you never know what's going to happen until, say, the last minute or even like a few weeks beforehand, I think that's a great matchup, whether in 2023 or 2024.
Mike, what do you think?
I think we'll see the Bivol fight first. I think just because Canelo seems to want that, I think he wants, to right that wrong. And Bivol's still there, whether it'll be 168, 175, or probably be 175. I'm sure Canelo's just kind of like that stubborn that even though everyone will tell him, fight Benavidez, like the fight's going to be huge, sell out maybe the SoFi Stadium, in Southern California with all the, the Hispanic fans in this area. He could probably sell out that against Benavidez. But I could see him just being like, nope, I'm not fighting anybody else until I've got that wrong against Bivol, because he just seems like he's, super stubborn, super competitive. So yeah, I think maybe I can see it. Maybe Cinco de Mayo 2024, still a big Mexican holiday. So yeah, count it in September or May. But I think Bivol, then hopefully Benavidez in May 2024.
Daniel, who do you think? Because Bivol has said that he can make 168. And he's like, oh, yeah, I have no problem making 168. So if, like, for example, if a fight opened up at 168, like a Canelo fight, he can go down to 168. Obviously, 175, he's a champion, but he has said in interviews he can go down to 168. For Benavidez, coming off of this win, who do you think, and I guess pound for pound, if you want to describe it like that, who is the more difficult and more competitive fight? Is it against somebody like Bivol, either at 168 or 175, or Canelo Alvarez at 168 pounds?
The right matchup is the much more difficult matchup, and that's Canelo, because Canelo, you could say he's in his prime, but you could also say that this is the perfect matchup at the perfect time. Bivol moving in weight is not the best idea, I would personally say. But him facing Benavidez, I think that's a great clash of styles, especially with their reach and their height and the way they work, because I think that Bivol is more of a plant type fighter with his jabs and moving on the outside, comparing on the inside to Benavidez. I think that's a good stylistic matchup, but I don't think it's the better of the two. I think that the Canelo matchup, based off of the two different styles, based off of the accomplishments of both, based off of the story you can write. I love a good story. I'm a big pro wrestling fan. I love a good story. So the story that I'll be adamant about, that I think everyone should agree with on, is Canelo versus Benavidez. Again, Bivol, solid idea when you put it on paper. But at the end of the day, the right fight to make, the best fight to make. Benavidez, Canelo.
So if I understand you correctly, what's tipping it for you is the high-profile nature of it and the story that's behind a potential Benavidez and Canelo fight.
Yes. There's no other way to put around it. Yes, money could play a factor, but at the end of the day, if boxing does not get this fight done, it's another boxing gonna boxing moment that just gets left behind due to money. And I don't think that would be the best idea for the sport that needs a super fight like this.
Let me pose this scenario to you. In the next 2 years, if you can only have the choice, let's just say you have the power, Aladdin's genie or something. In the next 2 years, if you can have the choice to either make Benavidez Canelo or Spence Crawford, which one are you picking?
Benavidez Canelo. I can explain why, because we've waited years for Spence Crawford. So what are they going to look like years older from each other? Like, we already have discussed Canelo versus Triple G, or Mayweather versus Pacquiao. Did most of the Canelo Triple G deliver? Yes. Later down the line, did they? Not quite. The Pacquiao Mayweather, we found out right that Pacquiao was injured. Was he not? So really, it comes to the point of like Tyson Fury upcoming fight, whoever he's going to face. You're a little tired of just the waiting game, and you're salivating for that fight. But what is coming up of it? Nothing. We've been teased of it many times before, and I would love for Spence and Crawford to fight one another. But am I salivating at the fact that we could immediately get Benavidez Canelo as a guarantee more than we can get Spence Crawford and say, oh, I really just want Spence Crawford more? No. I think that if I was a booking man, I'd book Spence Crawford right away. But knowing today's landscape in boxing, logically speaking, the Canelo-Benavidez fight is the one to look forward to, the one to root for more, because that it can actually happen. And it's closer to the 1 yard line than Spence Crawford.
Mike, what do you think about the first question I asked about whether it's a Benavidez-Bivol fight is more competitive, I guess pound for pound, if you want to describe it like that, than a Benavidez-Canelo fight?
Probably the Benavidez.
Speechless, huh?
Probably the Benavidez one.
Benavidez against who?
Canelo?
Oh, Benavidez-Canelo. You think that's a tougher matchup than a Bivol-Benavidez fight?
Well, in terms of...
I'm not talking about like, I know Daniel touched on like the profile, high profile nature and the story, which is right. Money wise, marketing, it's got the whole shebang. But if you look at just competitiveness between both fighters, what do you tip it to?
Competitiveness, I would say Bivol is the harder fight for Canelo.
You think Bivol's a harder fight for Canelo? No, I'm talking about who's a harder fight for Benavidez.
Out of who?
You what?
From who? Who's the harder fight? Benavidez?
For Benavidez, let's just say Benavidez had a choice between Bivol and Canelo Alvarez as opponents. Who is pound for pound the more difficult opponent for him?
Bivol. Because Canelo and Benavidez' style is actually very similar. They're kind of flat-footed, don't throw an awful lot, but when they do, it's with power and precision. So somebody that moves like a Bivol is going to be the hardest fight for both of them, I think. Trying to pin them down, very flat-footed. So I think, Bivol is the hardest fighter for both of them because he moves. He doesn't sit there.
Yeah, you know what? That's why I wanted to pose that question to both of you, because that's what I was thinking. Like, I know Bivol doesn't have the highest profile and all that, but, he got a little bit more attention ever since he beat Canelo, because it was a huge win for him, the biggest of his career. But he's one of those Eastern European guys, he's got the talent. And he's dangerous. And I think that, obviously because he doesn't have the profile that Canelo and even Benavidez have now, he doesn't get the attention. But I think that Bivol beats both of them. I really do. I think Bivol beats both of them. So even if Canelo-Benavidez fought, and let's just say Benavidez beats Canelo, if he fights Bivol, I still think Bivol beats him. Like, I think Bivol is that, like I think Daniel said, he's kind of like, or was it you saying Bivol's kind of like a Caleb Plant, but I think Bivol's just a little bit more polished, and Bivol's got more power. So I don't know. Either way, I think Bivol's going to be on the outside looking in, at least if Canelo and Benavidez fight. But it's an interesting dynamic to look at those three right now. Daniel, in terms of Benavidez, if he doesn't get Canelo in September, who's the ideal opponent for him?
I'm actually looking at the super middleweight rankings right now because I knew that conversation was going to be brought up. That's tough. And what do you really do in this situation if you're Benavidez? You have to wait to face the champion after already becoming the basically number one contender. So at that given point, who is the next best fighter? You can face a Billy Joe Saunders if you want, or you can face let's see. Yeah, I mean, you can try a David Morrell in there. It's a little bit tough because you already beat the top fighter in the division. So what do? Do you go backwards or do you go forwards? And it seems like he's going backwards by facing everyone else. And you could say Ryder, if Canelo beats him, a revenge fight of some sort. It's a tough situation because they're the super middleweight division, while incredibly like a fantastic division, you're not working on much, especially in the WBC rankings when you already beat the top guy. So maybe if I'm butchering his name wrong, I apologize. Christian Mabili. I would think that would be a good fight if you're talking about super middleweight in the WBC. I think that could be his best option if he doesn't get Canelo right away.
Right. And then I think, Mike, didn't you tell me that, was it, where did you see that somebody said, or they reported that the Morrell fight for David Benavidez is technically already agreed upon?
Yeah, and didn't Mauricio Suleiman announce that like afterwards? And like Dan just said, you could see that with all the belts being kind of like Canelo's probably got his next 2 fights pretty much announced, right? You're looking at Ryder and probably Bivol unless something happens in between. So like you said, he's kind of treading water at the time. And do you really want to go in there against someone like Morrell? It's risk reward. He's not like a big name, probably not going to be a huge purse. Okay, he has a version of the WBA title. But do you just sit it out for a while? Benavidez has had a pretty decently hard run, on his resume since he's turned professional. Do you take a little bit of time off, or, do you go in there against another one of the PBC dudes like, I don't know, Jose Uzcategui, someone like that, get in there, probably going to win, probably get a knockout, decent showing. Another knockout builds it up even more. Dan likes a story, builds it up even more, get another knockout. He looks unbeatable. Okay, here we go. He's a lean, mean killing machine ready for next May. I'll go in against someone like Morrell. He's a good fighter. He's not had many professional fights. He had a good amateur career, and he's one of those guys that kind of just sneakily been doing his stuff under the radar. Not many people shout out about him. Picked up a WBA version very early in his pro career. One of those fights where you take it, he ends up coming unstuck or doesn't have a good performance, and you're like, I knew he shouldn't have taken that.
Yeah, that's exactly what would happen. One last question for Dan. Should Benavidez fight at least in between now and, assuming Canelo, he's fighting Ryder, and then he says he wants Bivol in September, which seems like, he runs the show over there. Whatever he wants, he gets pretty much. He's at that position. Should Benavidez sit out until that Canelo fight pops up, hopefully next May? Or should he fight between now and then to stay active?
I find it very sad that we'll never get the Bivol Beterbiev fight if Canelo has his way. But with Benavidez, it's not that far off of a time frame where you could say, oh, he has ring rust or anything like that if he waits for Canelo. But you don't want him to wither away and have a disadvantage. I would think that he should take some time off, but if you have him fight, it's a risk versus reward. Like it's a slippery slope because you want him to fight, but you also don't want him to lose, and anything can happen in boxing. So I'm more on the side of him staying out because he deserves a title shot, and for him to stand his ground would be great. I can understand him fighting, but I would think as of this moment, standing his ground and just waiting for Canelo would probably be best.
It's kind of like the Ryan Tank Davis. Tank fought in January, fought Hector Luis Garcia, and got the win. And Ryan it was never officially announced, but there was reports that he was going to fight Mercito Gesta, who's a Golden Boy fighter as well. And then Ryan said, you know what? No, I'm not going to fight. I'm going to focus on the Tank fight and train for that. So he didn't want to, they were calling it a interim fight, or what do you call it? I don't know why the word's slipping my mind right now, but, and it's kind of, Ryan was in that same situation. He just came out and said, oh no, I don't want an interim fight. I want to just focus on the Tank fight. But even at that point, and kind of going back to your point, Dan, is that even when there was kind of reports that Ryan would fight Gesta. Ryan's got the reach. He's a tall guy. He's got the speed. I still thought that was a kind of a pretty intriguing fight, especially with Gesta beating JoJo recently. So I thought, I don't know if that's maybe it was the right decision for somebody like Ryan to kind of not take that fight because, Gesta, especially with his win over JoJo recently, and he's trained by Freddie Roach, I think, still, or he trains at Wild Card, and he's been there for years. I thought that was a more difficult fight than people thought. But for Benavidez, like Mike said, Morrell's there. Morrell's, I think, 8-0. He has less than 10 fights, but he had an extensive amateur career. So he's kind of an unknown to a lot of mainstream or casual fans, but he could be dangerous. He could be dangerous, and there's really nobody else right now that PBC would let Benavidez go and fight reasonably in the next, 8 to 12 months, or at least before any type of Canelo potential match, maybe sometime in the first quarter of next year.
Gabe Rosado.
Oh, you know what? Maybe.
Anytime, any place, anywhere, 24/7. That's what Gabe Rosado is. That's Nate true. Diaz of the boxing world.
That's true. You never know. Yeah, you never know. He didn't fight, maybe, and I don't think he has I think we were told by some people behind the scenes that Rosado's contract, I think, with Golden Boy is up. They offered him an extension, but he declined it. So I think he is a free agent as of right now, from what we were told. Maybe. You never know. Either way, Benavidez is 23, 24. Canelo's 31, 32. So they both, Canelo obviously has a lot of more mileage in terms of fighting, but they're both still fairly young, and we'll see how it goes going forward. In the co-main event, Cody Crowley gets the majority decision win over Abel Ramos by scores of 114, 114, 116, 112, and 115, 113. This was I believe it was this fight that was kind of controversial. Dan, did you catch this fight? And if you did, what'd you think?
I unfortunately was not able to catch this one, but I did hear great things. I saw some highlights of it. Sad to say, when you invited me, I did not tell you about that, but hopefully you won't hold that against me.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I was mistaken. So it's the Colbert and Valenzuela fight. That was the one that had the more controversy. So we'll touch on that in a second. Mike, what do you think about Crowley's majority decision win over Ramos?
Great victory. I'd seen Cody's been on a few undercards before. He's really done the boxing route the hard way, and then listening to his story about his father passing away, and then Cody taking that really bad, and having thoughts of suicide himself, and then coming into this huge card and then putting up probably the best victory of his career so far. You could see that's why he was super emotional just in the ring, and good on him, getting that victory on a big stage, all that added pressure with all the stuff that's been going on in his private life, and that's just made me want him to win even more. So yeah, just great victory for him, and hopefully he can get something bigger and better going forward from this.
Yeah, and then this was obviously a welterweight matchup, 147 pounds. I think both of those fighters, especially more for Crowley coming out as the victor, he's kind of entering the division kind of at a decent time, because Spence has already said that he's likely going to move up very, very soon. Crawford seems like he's going to move up as well. So a lot of these bigger names and more talented names at the moment.
Well, Crawford's in talks of our boy Lex. When I spoke to Lex,
right? Yeah. So Alexis Rochev, Golden Boy. Yeah, you were told that they're talking. So he is the mandatory, right, or WBO. Yeah. But what was interesting about this fight too is that both fighters, Crowley and Ramos, almost threw the exact number of identical punches in the 12 rounds of their fight. Ramos threw 854 through 12 rounds. Crowley threw 861 through 12 rounds. So that was pretty nuts. So they were definitely letting their hands go in that fight. So we'll see how they both progress going forward. Crowley with the win and Ramos with the loss, but they both definitely left it all in the ring. And then also Jesus Ramos gets the 7th round TKO over Joey Spencer. Spencer was down in round 1. Dan, I don't know if you saw this fight or if you saw highlights or pictures, but Ramos was huge compared to Spencer. I had seen pictures of him in Fight Week and stuff like that, but I wasn't really paying attention to the details. But when they were both in there on fight night, Ramos was just huge. He looked like he was maybe 2 or 3 weight classes above him. were you able to see any pictures or any video clips of this fight and compare the size difference?
Yeah, I was able to see images and then a few of the highlighted images, and I'm just like thinking to myself, what a gross mismatch. And I've seen some terrible mismatches before in MMA. You look at heavyweights that are like bigger than others, taller than others, bigger reach than others, and you've seen that with Bivol and Canelo, where Bivol's the taller fighter with the better reach. And you're just thinking to yourself, who made this fight happen? And who can I talk to understand why? And I think that like styles make fights, and you want to try to make the best for one specific fighter over another. But at a certain point, like, what are we doing here? And should we be concerned that this is going to be a normal thing down the line, just for the growth and development of certain fighters? Like, you want to give them an edge, but you also want to make sure that you don't harm the other fighter, or at least make it a fair fight where it looks like they're being tested.
Mike, what did you think about Ramos's win over Spencer?
Wasn't surprised by it, to be honest with you. Regular listeners of the show, I've never been one that was believed in Joey Spencer. I kind of do worry about some of the guys who come out and they turn professional and they have this huge like furore about them, like they're always doing this, have a big entourage, they're doing all these videos, all the social media. Joey Spencer was kind of like that. Gabriel Flores was like that. And I always worry about those guys seem to put a lot more about the promotion than the actual product. It's like there's something in there, and then they push them too far. And I always thought Joey Spencer was kind of like that. I thought he was very limited. And then when I thought he was fighting Jesus Ramos, I was like, good luck with that, buddy. Because he's absolutely huge. Every time he fights, he always manages to boil down and then, rehydrate and look so much bigger, big, strong, and kind of went on too long. I think the only thing about the fight was either the referee should have stopped it earlier or his corner should have done, because he was just taking a severe beating round after round after round, and he didn't look like he was going to come back into it. And being, still young at that time, it's probably not best for him, mentally to just take a beating like that. I think his corner should have just thrown it in and been like, you know what, dude, we'll save you for another day. You don't have to keep taking beating after beating, because some people, especially when they're young, they haven't got that grit and they become a little bit gun shy. So I have to see what they're going to do with Spencer, because I think they're going to have to go away and honestly rebuild, because I've always thought he was kind of limited, and he kind of looked like he used to win his fights just by being bigger, stronger, and just kind of just getting in there and brawling more than being like a boxer where you look at him and you think like, you know what, dude, like you select your punches really well, you move really well. I can see you being a world champion. I never saw that in Spencer.
Well, he still has some time to move forward.
Yeah, he's super young, and PBC obviously liked him because from the day he turned over with those guys, they've always pushed him.
Right. Yeah, he's been definitely showcased on a lot of PBC cards for the last couple of years. So I'm sure they're still going to showcase him going forward. I think that Ramos landed 172 of 413 of his shots, and Spencer, I believe, landed 147. Actually,
Spencer landed 48 of 155.
Yeah, 14%. So there was definitely a huge discrepancy there. So, and then Ramos also landed 32 body shots to Spencer's 13. So it was definitely a blowout. Ramos, I knew seeing it right away. I was like, oh wow, he's huge. Compared to him, he was huge. So we'll see how it goes moving forward. Rounding off the card, Chris Colbert gets a controversial, according to many spectators, unanimous decision win over 10 rounds over Jose Valenzuela by scores of 95-94 on all three judges' scorecards. Dan, if you caught this fight, or if you caught clips, or if you caught any analysis of this fight, there was a lot of uproar, I guess, a little bit, if you want to categorize it like that, in terms of there's a lot of people who saw this who thought Valenzuela deserved the nod. I was one of them. I believe Mike was one of them as well. I thought he did it more than enough to win. And Colbert just got the whatever the judges were watching, they thought he did a little bit more, at least by 1 point. What'd you think?
I agree with you. Unfortunately, it just seems to be weird luck for Colbert, especially after his loss to Hector Luis Garcia. It just seems like the path of his career is just taking a weird turn where he lost a fight, but he was earned a win due to his style and due to his ability to trick the judges in a sense. Now, it's not his fault that the judges, it is, but like it's not like his fault that the judges gave him the win. He did the performance that he thought he could do. But I do think that the term robbery doesn't really sound great to me. Last time I said robbery was in 2020, and I'm not really a huge fan of the word. But in this case, you could easily say it was a robbery. But the best thing to watch out for is the reactions post-fight, to see both fighters and then see how Colbert reacted to the win and how he taunted his opponent. And the best thing to see is what he does in his next fight, because it does give him a confidence boost after losing some of his mojo, not rightfully so, due to, like I said, a little bit of robbery there, but it just the way it just happened, and you can't really do anything about it now. Like I said, can't think about what could have happened or when it happened. You have to move on. But Colbert needs to look a little bit on the inside of himself and see what he has done wrong, what he did wrong in the fight, and how he can improve. Because the next fight, I'm sure it's not going to be an easy one for him, especially after being knocked down and just having to deal with a lot of adversity throughout.
Mike, what'd you think?
I thought Valenzuela did nick it by a couple of rounds. I thought he had a good game plan going into there. You could see that Colbert doesn't really like going in there and getting like manhandled and thrown around and stuff like that. And, Valenzuela was bigger and seemed to be stronger. Colbert's a little bit flashier. He likes to work like from the outside, come in, a little flurry, and then he likes to disappear out the pocket. And Valenzuela was just kind of like timing him, I thought. I thought his jab looked really good in the fight. Colbert kind of got himself, if it's not a robbery, it's definitely a petty theft. So he definitely got away with something there. And by what he said, I don't think he has any second thoughts about giving Valenzuela a second bite of the cherry. I think he's going to steal it and just run off and fight somebody else by the sounds of it, because I know that Valenzuela was hoping to run it back, and Colbert was kind of like throwing it in his face. So, yeah, I think maybe the judges thought Colbert was like maybe the A side or something like that. And maybe he thought, it's one of those ones where they thought PBC wanted him to win, and that's maybe why there was a little bit of favoritism that way, because, I definitely didn't see it 95, 94 in favor of Colbert.
Yeah, I hope we get the rematch, but it doesn't seem like we will. But it'd be great to run it back, next in a couple months. But we'll see. We'll see how PBC handles that matter. Also, this past Saturday from the Save Mart Center in Fresno, California on ESPN, Jose Ramirez gets the 28th win of his career with an 11th round knockout of Richard Commey. Commey was down twice in round 11 on the way to a stoppage for Ramirez. Ramirez, obviously, his only loss in his professional career so far is to Josh Taylor, who, at least at that time was one of the best fighters in the world at 140 pounds. Dan, what'd you think about Ramirez's win and kind of getting back into the win column after taking a loss against somebody like Josh Taylor?
I was happy to say I was able to watch that fight, especially towards the later rounds, because as what was going on with Showtime during that time, we want to make sure we catch all the boxing, and I did appreciate Ramirez's performance, fighting on the inside a little bit. Once he got Commey down, I was like, it's a struggle right then and there, because once you get clipped, especially by Ramirez, who looks impressive at several of his fights, but in this one specifically with the crowd behind him, hometown guy, like you have to just see that it was inevitable. But I do give Commey credit for making it at least exciting, a little bit too close to the vest, you could say. Well, not much of a loss for Ramirez heading into the later rounds anyway, but I did like Ramirez's performance enough to calmly say that he was deserving of the victory and of the fortune that came with it.
Mike, what do you think about Ramirez's win?
Oh, I thought it was a good fight. I don't think Commey looks the same ever since losing to Teofimo Lopez. I don't know whether it was just the stoppage just kind of knocked his confidence a little bit, or whether it's just father time, catching up with him. But it was a good victory for Ramirez. Gets him, obviously back into the win column, and there's some big fights ahead for him. So hopefully we get to see him back in there with it's a who's who, isn't it? Really, in and around that division, 140 or even 147 if he decides to move up again, in the future. So yeah, definitely some big fights for him.
Yeah, there's definitely some big fights on the horizon. And then that Fresno crowd, Ramirez has been the one guy over the last several years to really have put his fights on there because he's from that area up in Northern California. And people show up. They show up for him, Every time he's literally fought there, that arena is packed. So, which is cool for that area of Northern California because obviously they don't get that many fights in the Fresno area like that. But when they do, especially high-profile ones like this, they show up for somebody like Ramirez, which is good. I'm sure it makes him feel good as well. In the co-main event, Seniesa Estrada remains undefeated as well at 24-0 with a 10-round unanimous decision win over Tina Ruprecht. Ruprecht, is that you say, Mike?
Dan probably knows. You know Dan?
I would think that you are correct on that one.
I hope so. Seniesa, I believe retains. I know she was unified. Seniesa retains her WBA, WBC, and Ring Magazine minimum weight titles. Seniesa, obviously, I think is this the first fight under the Top Rank promotional banner, or is this the second fight? Do we know?
That's a good question.
I believe this is her debut with Top Rank, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it is. I think it is as well. Yeah. So I think this was her debut. Obviously, it was successful. Estrada has been vocal about fighting, which is kind of ironic. It seems like it's the girl who took her place at Golden Boy. It's Yocasta Valle, who is from, I believe she's from Puerto Rico. Is she Mike, right? Puerto Rico?
Yeah, she fought on Friday on the same card as Maricela Conijo. They had
okay, so she just fought as well.
Yeah, she fought on Friday in an all-female card in Puerto Rico done by Marv Nation.
Okay, so she's with Golden Boy Promotions. Like I said, she kind of slid into Seniesa's, I guess, if you want to call it, role when Seniesa left and went to Top Rank. But Seniesa has been kind of asking for that fight, and they've been kind of going back and forth. Dan, what do you think about that fight? And then also, you talk about having a story. That would have to be, I guess, a co-promotion in between Golden Boy and Top Rank, which just adds to any type of story like that. What would you think about that potential fight?
I was wrong. First, I wanted to say I believe that was her second fight. I just looked it up.
Okay. Yeah. Well, we were close enough. We were off by one.
Yeah. No disrespect to her. We've seen her knock someone out in 7 seconds, so we don't want that.
Yeah.
I love the idea that women's boxing have these rivalry fights, have these title fights that have value. You've seen it with Michaela Marilisha Bumgarner. You've seen it with Amanda Serrano, Katie Taylor, Clarissa Shields, and Marshall. I love this idea that no matter where you are, no matter what organization you're a part of, even if you've left the organization, you're still going to get these fights. And Estrada, I love the fact that her Top Rank second fight, basically co-main event, people rooting for her getting the dominant win. I think that the idea that her next challenger would be a grudge fight, but also maybe for titles, but also maybe in her hometown area. I think that that's a perfect recipe for success. And for women's boxing, just another opportunity to show, oh, hey, we're here. We're doing what the men can't do and have the fights that everybody wants to be made. And that's a fight that needs to be made. And it's going to be great for either, what would we say, probably the later half of 2023 or at least early 2024.
Right. Yeah. And like you touched on, for a lot of the women's fighters, even if they are with different promoters or signed to different promoters, it's a little easier to make cross-promotional fights with them, which is good for fans, but I'm sure it's also good for the best fighters in the divisions as well. So, I think they will fight. I don't know. Mike, do we know if Estrada, have we ever heard anything, or Dan, and maybe you heard anything? Do we know if she's still on good terms with Golden Boy, or was it like a bad breakup there?
From what I heard, I think it was just she thought she was worth X amount. Golden Boy kind of disagreed, and I think they just agreed to, okay, well, I'll go elsewhere. I don't think it was anything that's going to be like a grudge where they're going to be like, hey, you're not fighting, Valle for the titles or anything like that. I'm sure with the way that Oscar De La Hoya likes to match people, he seems to be one of the harder matchmakers, and Golden Boy, just as a promotion, I'd say, are pretty good at matchmaking.
Right, yeah, possibly. I mean, hopefully there's no bad blood there, but because obviously that would affect any type of negotiation between Top Rank and Golden Boy for these two fighters. But I don't think there is, so hopefully we get that fight maybe by the end of this year. Also, this past weekend from the Manchester Arena in Manchester on Sky Sports in a WBO Cruiserweight Championship match, Lawrence Okolie remains undefeated at 19-0 with the 12-round unanimous decision win over David Light, who takes the first professional loss of his career. Okolie won by scores of 116, 112, 119, 108, which is very, very big, and 117, 110. I'll start with you, Mike, since you're our UK resident expert here. What do you think about this fight?
Awful.
Tell us why.
It's just Okolie had gone back to his old kind of punch, hug when they get close, punch, hug when they get close. Eddie Hearn will not be having unsleepless nights about him leaving and going to Sky Sports for a bigger deal. Wow. Yeah. And then they were giving away tickets, supposedly. Giving away links to tickets to get tickets just to fill the stadium because it was just that. It was going to be that empty. So, yeah, I'm sure Eddie Hearn's rubbing his fingers. The fact that, Sky Sports gave him such a big deal and he was going to be one of the main faces of, boxing on Sky Sports. And that's what he did. You could see just going on Twitter when you were looking at the updates, how boring it was. And even somebody posted a picture of everyone leaving the arena after a couple of rounds because you could kind of just see what it was. But he's just one of those unfortunate people. I think he has an effective style to go with his build that wins him matches because he's, unified world champion, but it's just super boring. Sorry, he's WBO world champion, not unified. But it's just super boring, but it's effective. Right? What do you want to do? Like if you're him, you're like, well, am I going to put myself in harm's way just to please you guys? Not necessarily, even though it is a business. He probably would get paid more if he did that. But you're just hoping maybe under the new coach, Sugar Hill, that maybe he's going to sit down and do his punches a little bit more, kind of change more to a Kronk style. But at the minute he's not gonna be filling any stadiums or anything like that, or getting these big purses that he probably thinks he should get, because it's hard to watch. It really is hard to watch. And we're three boxing geeks, and we were probably all. You haven't spoken yet, but I'm pretty sure we were all bored by it.
Dan, what'd you think of like Mike just touched on? Okolie was with Matchroom Eddie Hearn for a good portion of his career, fighting on DAZN. He recently, I believe this was his debut with Sky Sports and Boxer. And he said, I think within the last couple of weeks or so, it might have been Fight Week, when he was asked about the split with Eddie Hearn and all that, he pretty much said like, I was sick of telling people, and I'm paraphrasing, but it was something along the lines of, he was like, I was sick of telling people how to find my fights, to download some app, DAZN, and put your email in, create a password and stuff. He was like, instead of just telling them, oh, turn to this channel, like Sky Sports or something like that. He was like, nobody was watching me on DAZN. What's your take on, those words that he said in regards to his split from Eddie Hearn and DAZN. And also, I think right after that, I think DAZN announced a partnership about having a channel for DAZN on Sky Sports. So it's kind of ironic. It's like, if they would have told him that, would he have stayed? What do you think?
It's tough to really say because in a sense he made a decision that he thought was right. But like I said, with reflecting on the future and the past, we don't really know, especially since nobody really knew about the new partnership that DAZN with Sky had. I think that he thought he made the right choice, but realistically, maybe it was a blessing in disguise that he didn't stay with Matchroom or DAZN, or maybe that Matchroom and DAZN didn't stay with him. Realistically, we saw the matchup that recently happened. Not the best performance, but you get the win. But is he going to put butts in the seats when he fights down the line? And especially if he has a consideration for potentially moving to heavyweight. So, it's not up to Matchroom and DAZN really to really, he has to help entice people to tune into fights. Yes, it's the brand, but it's also the fighter. And that's where I think a lot of fighters branding wise haven't done that well over the years. I think that they're marketing towards each other, they could improve on. And so maybe with Coley, maybe it's a him situation more than a them situation. It's hard to say, it's a slippery slope to be in, because either you're going to appease the network, or you're going to reject the network, or you'll be making the network mad at you, or you make the fighter mad at you, or you appease the fighter. There's no true win-win situation here, because there was already a deal, I guess, in place, but maybe there wasn't one when he made his decision, and it just happened out of nowhere. That's tough to say, but as far as his fight is concerned, did it prove that he could be a leading man and say, like, you can find me on this channel? Will people tune in to watch his fights now based off of his previous performance? That's the thing that you have to really talk about at the end of the day. Right. Yeah. I think that's a very, very good point. But we'll see. I'm interested to see how, if it works out for him over there with Boxer and Sky Sports. He got the win, so at least he got the win there. Moving on to fight previews this upcoming Saturday, the 1st of April, from the O2 Arena in London on DAZN. Speaking of DAZN, here's another DAZN matchup. AJ Anthony Joshua, 24-3, returns to the ring as he goes up against the 21-1 Jermaine Frankilin. This is AJ's first fight under the tutelage of trainer Derek James. His last fight in the Usyk loss, in the rematch loss, he had Robert Garcia. So the last 3 fights, if you include the one that's coming up this Saturday, he's going to have 3 different trainers. What do you expect from AJ on Saturday, Dan? Especially with a new trainer like Derek James. I like the new addition of James. I do think that Joshua needs to have his head on top of his head, or on the top of his shoulders is the right term, because I think that based off his past performance with Usyk, people are going to wonder what he's going to be able to accomplish, what he's going to be able to do, where his mindset's at. And I think that the fight in general, if the fight is ended via knockout, it's by Frankilin. But if it goes the distance, I have AJ winning by split decision because he can keep his distance, provide pressure with a fight that could potentially go all over the place. I do like that Joshua, his rate of his opponents landing their shots, 9th fewest by 8.0, and a 5.1 landing mark, the 8th least in boxing for his opponents. Now, Usyk did land the most out of any Joshua opponent twice, but will Frankilin do that? Frankilin likes to go within the clinch, and he likes to use his power, but will he be too aggressive with his style of fighting ability against someone in Joshua who can be patient? Now, there are moments where he is known for not blocking shots, where he can be a little lackadaisical, but I feel like with Derek James, who his fighters adapt to the close range and to the long range. Like it's a multi-mixed type of training adaptability, you could say, if that's a term we could use. Joshua chose him due to his unique training style. And I think that being in America for this, fighting an American fighter, I think that Joshua can actually improve upon his latest performances, especially 2-3 in his last 5 fights. He's in a little bit of limbo right now. I have Joshua winning, but be wary of Franklin's power, and also be wary of Franklin's mindset, given that his recent issues with Salida Promotions that were just recently brought out. Both of them have the mental side they need to work on, but whose mental side will be secreted enough to use the physical side for victory?
Mike, what do you think, especially with AJ having a new trainer?
It's going to be interesting to see, because it's obviously their first fight together. Like, how much, if you're coming in as a new trainer, you just want to like try and implement little things. I don't know if he's going to have enough time, and obviously he's definitely had not enough fights with this being the first fight together to implement like an overall change of kind of like everything. But yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting, because one of the biggest problems AJ has is really just his confidence. It's more mental than anything else. He's pretty good at just having the boxing fundamentals, 1, 2, 3, pretty good at throwing all of those. It's really just up here, ever since he's had those losses. And then he seems to really take, for someone who's such a global superstar like he is, he seems to take criticism really poorly, because you'll see him in interviews where he turns the question around and actually asks them. He's like, well, what do you think? Like, he's kind of looking for some kind of like admiration, or he's looking for, some good words from them to make him feel a little bit better. So I think, if he's in the right place, his new gym away from England, that maybe takes the pressure off a little bit, because he's in a bigger gym already surrounded by superstars. And, he probably wants to get in there. He's like a new kid at school. Like, I want to show Charlo that I'm good. I want Charlo to think I'm the best in the gym. That sort of thing. He gets in there and has to try and like really show off in front of those guys. He's not the big dog in the gym, because I'm sure Derek James will be like, hey, you're coming in to train at like 12. I have Charlo coming in at 10 and the other Charlo coming in at 11. You're at 12. You better not be fucking late. There's not, AJ's not dictating like, I'm coming in at 2 today because I want to lie in. I'm sure Derek James is telling him what to do, like it should be, kind of like military-esque. So it's going to be interesting to see what it does. And I think we might get shocked a little bit, because I think Franklin, from what they've said, obviously we haven't had the weigh-in yet, but they've said that Franklin's actually lost like 20 pounds. So I think Franklin's coming into shock. And if I was Franklin, with AJ coming off a few losses, not being the best, mentally, and, coming in and having to try new things with a new trainer, I would try and jump on AJ. And we know that AJ's not got the best chin. So I do wonder if, if Franklin's just decided just to go at him, like, hey, this is going to be a 4-round fight. I'm just going to fucking go in there and just go at him and just swing for the hills. It could be interesting. It really could be interesting. But I've been British, I want AJ to win because I want those big fights. Franklin, Tyson Fury, no one wants to see that. We want Joshua Fury. We want Joshua Joyce. We want Joshua Wilder. I would even pay for Joshua against Dillian White too, since the first one was so good, and then he had a big brawl in the middle of remember when he tried to hit him after the bell and everyone had to jump in and there was a big melee. So, yeah, I'd like to see Joshua get back in there, get into the win column, because there's so many big fights that can be involved with him, especially selfishly, some of the huge British fights.
Dan, do you think that bringing Fury into the mix here, since he's obviously the heavyweight division as well, with as crazy as Fury could be sometimes with his antics and his public negotiation videos with Usyk and all these, everything he puts out there, if Joshua wins this upcoming Saturday, do you think there's any chance that Fury turns his attention from Usyk to Joshua because it's a bigger money fight in the UK?
And we're going to have to deal with the same thing we dealt with a few months ago? No, that's going to be such fun. Oh, why you do this to me?
I thought about it. I was like, you know what? If anybody's going to do that, it's Fury.
Oh, of course. He's going to call him out in the middle of the event. He's going to call him out after the fight. I think that Fury would focus his attention more to Joshua because his failed negotiation tactics. That's right, his failed negotiation tactics with Usyk has led to a little bit of a little nothing going on within the heavyweight division. Now, the fight to make initially was Joshua versus Wilder. That's not happening anymore. Joshua versus Fury, we attempted that I think twice, technically once, but twice, if you can count a few years ago. Didn't happen. It's about time it happens. I think that Joshua needs to have a convincing win in order for the Fury fight to really hold much juice. But I do think that Joshua at first Fury is the fight to make no matter what. The end goal is Fury versus Usyk. But if you're not going to have that and you need to have a fight for Fury that is credible, that makes sense, that is not a waste of everyone's time, then I think that Joshua is the right opponent for that. And if you sense my tone in it, you can talk about the last Fury fight in regards to wasting everyone's time.
Yeah. Fury definitely plays the mind games and all that, especially with the public videos he always puts out on social media. So we'll see what happens after this Saturday between the Joshua and Franklin fight. But I was interested to hear both of your takes on that, saying that Franklin does have a reasonable chance, because I'm sure there's some listeners who aren't as listening right now who aren't as familiar with Franklin, but obviously they're familiar with AJ and they think, oh wow, these guys are giving some type of shot to Franklin. So it makes...
There was scorecards that had Franklin beating Dillian White. If you remember, he was definitely a lot busier than Dillian White was. And obviously White was with Buddy McGirt and he had that, cross-body defense that he was using to try to protect himself from the uppercuts. In that fight, I honestly thought it was just Franklin did look a little bit fluffy, shall we say. So, losing those 20 pounds will probably do him good, and especially, like stamina-wise. And we know what AJ's like, carrying around all that muscle. He gets to the later rounds and he normally gasses out. So maybe that old term, maybe Franklin's looking for a long flight, drag him into deep waters and, drown him, later on. So we'll see.
And you think about it, Franklin, in a sense, is a carbon copy, maybe we'll see like weight-wise, about Andy Ruiz. And then also Jarrell Miller. I personally thought when I was covering that fight week that Jarrell Miller he wasn't the one that really broke Joshua. I think it was before that, say, the Joseph Parker fight. I thought it looked a little bit rough for him. But when Jarrell Miller pushed Anthony Joshua, something within Joshua broke, because you don't see Joshua lose emotion that easily. And so I thought that Jarrell Miller, based off emotion, based off of power punching skill, I thought that Jarrell Miller was going to beat Joshua. And when Ruiz got announced as the new opponent, there was a slight part of me that saw it based off of the pre-fight shenanigans where nobody was giving Ruiz a shot due to his size, due to his, his resume. Ruiz got the job done. I had a feeling he was going to do it. When it happened, I was shocked, but it wasn't too shocked. I think of it as the same thing with Franklin. Will it be a shocking moment if he loses to Franklin? No. But will it be a surprising just for the growth of Joshua in this fight? It could be, and I'm not discounting Franklin, even if the mental side he may be a little out there with his issues going on with his team or the loss that he had recently where he could have potentially won. I think that he's motivated more than ever, and I think that can make for a great fight. And Joshua should be aware of it. And I think he is aware and not taking him lightly.
This is for Dan, right? I hope Joshua wins by knockout. Jerome Miller, ringside, stands up, calls him out, starts saying, I think last time he was saying that I'm like the landlord and you're paying me rent and all this sort of stuff when you're in New York. And then, AJ is like, oh, you needed drugs to cheat me. And he's like, just a big melee, big WE style melee. Eddie Hearn's like, oh, I would never, pay to have him, fight again. Then Kugan Cassius asked him recently, and he kind of dialed down a little bit on it. He's like, well, I was like, okay, so there's a chance. We've been saying all this time, if I was Miller, I would just go full villain, just play on it. play on it about the drugs, everything. You just go full villain and just go out there and he'll probably get himself a big fat payday doing that against somebody. Because like you say, boxing is kind of like WWE. You have those, good guys, bad guy stories. I'm sure boxers probably call each other like, hey, let's do this in the fucking media room, blah, blah, blah. Because it sells. Pay-per-view sells. We all want to see it.
Jarrell Miller is already the bad guy in this situation. So
turn it up, dress it all black.
I agree. Tyson Fury is playing a heel right now, but I think Jarrell Miller, if he tried and he was motivated enough, he can out-surpass Fury as the ultimate heel in boxing. And I would love to see, after all these years, just to see what he missed out on by fighting Joshua again. I want to see that matchup. I like chaos, but we'll have to wait and see what the matchup with Joshua and Franklin does in order to see if Miller is the right opponent for him. Though you're convincing me. I didn't want to be convinced, but now I am, and now I'm going to promote it everywhere I go.
Yep.
And it's all your fault.
It's true though. Hey, but you said, Dan, that you're a fan of the story, which we all are, but regardless, if he turns it up, professional wrestling style and just embraces that villain role, even though he already has it, but he just turns it up to 20, it'd be a lot more entertaining for not just the hardcore boxing fans, but even the casual fans. Like, oh, who is this guy? I mean, like, Mayweather had the blueprint, right? He utilized HBO 24/7 series during his De La Hoya fight and then after in his subsequent fights, and created that role, and then ironically around that time, just after the De La Hoya win, he was on, we're talking about the WrestleManias this weekend here in Los Angeles. We're based out of over here in Southern California. Mayweather had, I guess a match or some type of event at WrestleMania just after the De La Hoya fight. So, and I think he's even said in interviews that he spoke to, Vince McMahon and the higher ups at WWE. And I think even Triple H, who's now one of the higher guys there, and they told him like, hey, you need to embrace that role. Turn it up, turn up that character. And he did it. And luckily he had the talent to back it up. So it created more buzz around his name, and, it worked out. I mean, we're not comparing Jarrell Miller to Floyd Mayweather in that regard, but, if he can turn it up and get a couple wins here and there to kind of creep up the rankings and get some attention financially, even from Eddie Hearn, like Mike said, maybe he can cash out, get an AJ fight or so, one of the bigger heavyweights, and cash out. He gets knocked out. He's like, all right, I'm out. I did what I had to do, pro wrestling style.
I will say Floyd Mayweather, that fight against the Big Show, I believe at WrestleMania 24, that build was fantastic. And Floyd, not the best actor in the world, you could say, but he did his part well with WWE, and the match was worth it. One of the best celebrity matches you'll ever see in pro wrestling, which is very rare. But he played the part well. He got paid the amount he was worth. And I think that he embraced it right now with his exhibition bouts. And I think that pro wrestling has something to do with it a little bit. And I think people should attend a pro wrestling class or try pro wrestling at once in a while, because it's worth it. And you could see what it's done for Mayweather. And with the Jarrell Miller stuff being so controversial, a great man once said, controversy creates cash.
Eric Bischoff.
Yes. Eazy-E said, controversy creates cash. Best-selling book, I guess. I haven't read it yet. I really want to, but if he said that, and he knows a little bit about controversy with the NWO, with all his Monday Night Wars, I do think that it's true. Controversy creates cash. We've seen that with Conor McGregor, Khabib Nurmagomedov. We've seen that with everybody in boxing, with Canelo trying to reach greatness against Bivol. We've seen even the worst of the worst get their due. We've seen Jake Paul manage to take over the boxing world. Controversy creates cash. And in this sense, Jarrell Miller, as much as it pains me to say it, he's controversial enough. It'll make cash for a fight against Joshua after all these years. So you know what? Go for it. Why not? Let's go crazy here. Look at you making me do. You're making me support this. I love it.
We unlocked the professional wrestling side of you a little bit more right there. That's what it was.
That's a dangerous side.
But also one more quick bit on that. When we talked to, we interviewed Eddie Hearn just after the Chavez Jr. and Daniel Jacobs fight at the end of 2019 in Phoenix, Arizona. We were both there covering that fight. And then we interviewed him the next morning in the Fighter Hotel. And I remember, Chavez Jr., people felt like he quit, even though he said, his nose kind of was affected, his breathing and all that stuff. And then people started throwing stuff into the ring, And we had asked Eddie Hearn about, hey, would you work with Chavez Jr. again, even after something like that yesterday? People throwing stuff into the ring and they thought he quit. And he said, he's like, you know what? I don't know. I think I would. And, and that people started reporting on that. People can go back into our archives and listen to the episode, but like people focused on that quote saying, I can't believe he would still work with somebody like Chavez Jr. After something like that. So the fact that he told IFL TV, like Mike was mentioning earlier, that there might be some type of opening for him to work with Jarrell Miller, it's not really that surprising because he had told us he would still be open to work with Chavez Jr. a couple of years ago after that situation. So, I think these promoters, especially Eddie Hearn, they kind of know, like you said, controversy creates cash. If it makes dollars, it makes sense. So, we've seen crazier things happen. So we will see. I mean, Adrian Broner just signed with Don King. What how much crazier could you get? We'll see. We will see. Also on the card quickly, Matteo Signani, 32-6-3, goes up against Felix Cash for the EBU European middleweight title. Fabio Wardley returns 15-0 goes up against Michael Polite Coffee. That's an interesting name. I don't think we've ever seen that name, Mike. And then Austin Amo Williams returns as well, undefeated 13-0 against River Wilson Bent. And then also this upcoming weekend from Tulsa, Oklahoma on ESPN Plus, Robeisy Ramirez, 11-1, goes up against Isaac Dogbe for the vacant WBO featherweight title, a top rank on ESPN card from the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then also Joet Gonzalez, 25-3, goes up against Enrique Vivas, 22-2. I think that's actually a pretty interesting matchup. But this is some final stuff we wanted to get your take on, Dan, before we finish up this week's episode. Obviously, we appreciate your valuable time here on the last round. The pay-per-view prices for two fights that were just recently announced. Gervonta Davis, Ryan Garcia on Showtime will be $84.99. Devin Haney versus Vasily Lomachenko was just announced, I believe, today or yesterday, within the last 12 hours or so, as of this recording. That fight was just announced for May 20th at the MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas on ESPN pay-per-view for $59.99. Give us your take on both of these fights having two different price points.
It's nice middle ground comparing to when I pay for $79 for UFC pay-per-views. But I think that the Haney fight, I'm surprised it's not more, because it's not a cool, you could say it's a bigger matchup than Tank Garcia due to the fact that it's the undisputed titles versus the king of the lightweights in Vasily Lomachenko. I think that's a fantastic matchup. And I think that Garcia and Tank is a great matchup. Is it worth the $80? I think that if you reverse the two, it would make much more sense, just because of like Haney's, like where he is in boxing compared to those two. Like, yes, Gervonta Davis is a champion when you compare to Haney's lightweight titles, but though that matchup, I think that makes the most sense when you're trying to defend that price point, when you're talking about celebrities being interested in that fight, when you're talking about the younger fans being interested. You're going to get the younger generation paying buttloads of money for that. They'll pay whatever. I think that's more of a generational type of situation. Haney Lomachenko, you have the right clientele for that price point. I'd still like it reverse, but you have the right clientele for Haney Lomachenko. You have the correct matchup and clientele for Tank Davis, Ryan Garcia? Is it extensive amount of money? Is it too much? Sure. I would agree with you. Will we be watching and tuning in because it's going to be a great night of boxing? 100% yes. And let's not forget, technically you're paying 2 for the price of 1 for Haney-Lomachenko, because on that same day you have Katie Taylor fighting in Ireland for free. I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I believe it's not his own pay-per-view. So you have 2 for the price of 1. You're basically going to have a great matinee of fights for boxing. So that price point is perfect for 2 boxing fights in that weekend. And I think that Davis-Garcia is alone so far on that fight weekend. So unless something big comes across, you're going to pay what? You go for a night out, you spend night on drinks, dinner, it's going to be $84 regardless. So you could stay home, have some hot dogs, or make yourself a peanut butter sandwich like I'm going to do later, or have some cereal and just enjoy the fights. Make it the least going out but most expensive weekend of your life. It's fine. Again, switch it, fine. Is it worth it? 100% yes. It was a long rant to just say it was worth it.
No, yeah. Well, that's what we have you on, man. We want to hear the expansion of some type of analysis. That's exactly what we want. And then also, there's been a report that PBC is going to have an event on May 13th at the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas. Showtime will televise. I believe it's Alberto Puello against Rolly Romero, right, Mike? Yeah. That's going to be the main event of a triple header from the Cosmopolitan, which is kind of like a concert venue. I know they've had a couple events there, so we'll see how that turns out. And then also Jaime Munguia's promoter, Fernando Beltran of Zanfer, I said in a recent interview that a Dimitri Bivol fight for Jaime Munguia is not in the cards, which I think is a smart move. So they're not planning on any of that, because I know there was rumblings and stuff like that. So I think that's a very smart move. But Beltran did say that they're focusing on Triple G for sometime in June, which, hey, I'm for it. You know, Munguia needs a name. And Triple G, even though he is older, still shows that he could be somewhat dangerous. So I think that's still an interesting matchup. I don't know if you both remember. I know Mike remembers, but a couple years back, when Triple G fought, was Ivanis Martirosyan here in Carson, California, in LA at the StubHub Center. He was supposed to fight. Who was his original opponent, Mike?
Munguia.
No, it wasn't Munguia. Munguia offered to step in.
Oh, it was Canelo when Canelo tested positive.
That's right. Okay, so it was a Canelo fight. Canelo tested positive, and 360 Promotions, Tom Loeffler were trying to save the matchup for Triple G, and then Munguia's camps came in and said, "Hey, we'll try to do it," but the Nevada State Athletic Commission rejected him as an opponent, saying, "Oh, no, that's too dangerous. You're not ready for somebody like Triple G," which honestly, they probably were right. You know, everybody was kind of clamoring at that moment, like, "No, let him fight. Like, you know, they can do it. He's fine." But looking back on it, now that we've seen Munguia, like, even though Munguia is impressive, but at that time, Triple G was a monster. So I think that was probably the right deal. The Nevada State Athletic Commission was right in that decision. But now, you know, maybe we'll see it in June, a couple of years later. I think that's an intriguing matchup still, even with the 40-year-old or 41-year-old Gennady Golovkin. I think that's very, very interesting. And Dan, one final thing I wanted to get your take on, you being a writer, reporter, journalist in the combat sports world. It was recently, I guess, revealed that ESPN senior writer from ESPN.com for boxing, and he also covers some pro wrestling, Mike Coppinger, who's a pretty big name in the boxing world, has, I don't know if it's a recent or not recent event, but has been banned by PBC and I don't want to say Showtime, because I think Espinosa's come out and kind of said it's not really them. Has been banned by PBC, Al Heyman, that whole crew. So that's why he wasn't at the Benavidez Plant fight this past weekend. You as a writer, reporter, journalist in the combat sports world, what's your reaction to something like that, especially by any somebody with as big of a platform as Mike Coppinger on ESPN?
It's a interesting situation, definitely interesting topic. And I've used this word before, but slippery slope, because obviously there are two sides, I guess, unless you have like someone to come on and say and give their side. It's hard to really say what the situation is. Obviously, as a journalist, you care for the journalist aspect of it, of trying to see what the deal is, but you also can maybe see that at a certain point something might have happened. I'm not sure. It's like you can compare it to Ariel Helwani and Dana White. That is a rivalry going on for years, but you don't really like. There's one story behind it, like with the Brock Lesnar situation, I believe at UFC 200, if I'm not mistaken. But there's another point to be made that you don't know the inner workings unless like you're involved in it, and we are involved in the writing aspect. You want to make sure that you attend these events. You want to make sure that these organizations are bringing you. Is there an internal issue that we may not know about more than others? Sure. I could barely tell you any controversial drama there, but it makes for interesting banter on social media, as we did see it take place over the weekend with PR people involved. You want to hope that it's something that can be resolved, because you want all sides covering. You want someone covering your sport. You want someone covering your fights, but you also want good representation so you can attend these events. So whatever the issue is, resolve it or have them face off in a wrestling ring, and I'll gladly cover that. I will call the match. I will write about it. I will do a tail of the tape about it, and we can go from there and try to resolve it. I'll even extend that to Helwani and Dana. Dana, you want to come on in a UFC ring and face Ariel Helwani? That's fine by me too.
Steven Espinoza, the head of Showtime Sports, obviously very involved in the boxing side. He runs that for Showtime as well. Like you mentioned, there were some PR people from Top Rank's team who kind of opened up the floodgates on that whole topic, kind of going back and forth and stuff like that with Espinoza and all that. And the topic got on. I believe Espinoza said something along the lines of, "Oh, we didn't get any coverage on ESPN and all that." And then there was people who responded saying, "No, what are you talking about? Benavidez was on First Take. They covered it on Max Kellerman's show and this and that." But then Espinoza responded saying, "Oh, that's not sufficient," or something like that. How do you being the combat sports editor, Dan, with people under you as regular reporters or writers who kind of report to you, how would you, ideally, how would you address a situation like that if you had a writer that was banned from a promotional company like that? How would that affect, if any, the coverage that you give to that respective promotion?
Well, I'll first say that I do report to people within sporting news more than I do myself. There's Tom Gray and Andreas Hale, two amazing writers who one was from the ring with Tom, and then Andreas, longtime sporting news contributor. So I guess it's different for me to be involved in that situation,
right,
or to provide my own thoughts on it. But I would think I like to mediate things. I like to say controversy creates cash, but I also am probably the least controversial person when it comes to getting involved in, say, like those type of situations. So maybe it's just something where you want to talk about, maybe have a medium ground with both relationships, just to see what the deal is, and maybe try to work it out. Confrontation never, in this case, probably won't solve anything. But if you try to make it move forward to try to get a mediation involved, it could work. It's probably not the answer that you're looking for, but it's like I said, it's a slippery slope when you're dealing with one side of your job, but also the other side of your job, where you want to get involved with the PR aspect of it.
Mike, do you think it has anything to do with the alleged MTK connection?
I don't think so. I never even thought of that. I don't think so. I'm
Because
guessing.
I mean, like it's not like we're like saying like there's Espinoza has you can go to his Twitter account and it's like has come out and said stuff about coverage from Mike Coppinger, and then there was recently revealed that Mike Coppinger was the one who voted for Kinahan for Manager of the Year a couple years back or something, and then there was other people, they go after him for saying, oh, you trying to cozy up to MTK and Kinahan and all that stuff, allegedly. Do you think that had anything to do with this, whatever ban this was?
It's probably just something he's written, I imagine. If you remember, he was banned from the Kovalev fight, wasn't he? So I think at times, we can, when we put our fans hat on, we complain, when journalists kind of sit on the fence and don't ask these hard questions. But then at the same time, when you do, you end up in situations like Copton, even though he's at ESPN. I think he was, he got banned from the Kovalev one, and then maybe he may be banned for something he's written about the PBC. I have no idea. So at times, that's why they don't ask these hard questions. And if that's someone like Coppinger's banned from, the PBC for something he said or something he's written, that's
right.
Why these smaller companies also don't do it, because, ESPN is absolutely freaking massive, probably the biggest sports channel in the world, and they banned Coppinger from going to events. Then, that's why these little YouTube pages and stuff like that, that's why they don't ask the hard questions, because they still want to go to events. They still want to get access, and that's how easily it can be cut off.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It is a slippery slope. The term that Dan's been using a couple times today. So, it sucks, but the whole freedom of the press is the Constitution. I don't think it applies to private entities like that. If you're covering government, the White House here in the United States and all that, it works for you, but I don't think it works for us over here on this side. So, how do we balance that? That's a topic for another day. That's a whole episode on its own. Kind of maybe we'll bring a lawyer in for that or something, a sports attorney or something.
The best
Dan,
one you can find.
Say that again?
The best one you can find.
Yeah, we've had a couple of attorneys on.
Boxing Esquire, he was on.
Yeah, he's been on. There's some other ones we reached out to who are big on contracts, so hopefully we coordinate with them. That'd be interesting to talk about. But Dan, we appreciate your time this week here on The Last Round. Your first time, hopefully not your last time. You're welcome back anytime. Before we completely sign off for this week's episode, go ahead and let the listeners know where they can find you and follow you on the socials and everywhere else.
Well, perfect. Thank you for having me. I do appreciate the opportunity. This has been a great experience where I've even said a few words a little bit too much, a slippery slope here and there. But you can follow me on Dan, Yanofsky on Twitter, D Yanofs on Instagram, I believe, and as usual on The Sporting News, where we will, and SN_fights on social media, where we will be discussing all content going on throughout this weekend, all fights, including WrestleMania and the return of Roy Jones Jr. this weekend, when it was a fight weekend. So keep an eye on all that, and hope to banter with you back and forth if Twitter's not broken by then. So just keep on contacting me, and I'll discuss any controversial fight topic you want to a degree, and talk women's boxing with me.
Sounds good. I guess for Roy Jones, we didn't mention it. We must have forgot, right, Mike? I guess we must have forgot. But shout out to Roy Jones, one of the best to ever do it. So for our guest of the weekend, Daniel Yanofsky, I hope I said that right, of The Sporting News. For my co-host, Michael Shepard. Actually, before we completely sign off, Mike, go ahead and let them know where they can find us and follow us again.
And we are at The Last Round 12 on Instagram and Twitter. Be sure to join us next week. We've got a whole host of fights. Sebastian Fundora, Brian Mendoza, Shakur Stevenson is back against Shikuri Yoshino. MJ against Marlon Tapaz, Ryan Ford, Jesse Magdaleno, just to mention a few.
The sport never stops, right? We're year round. We don't have seasons like some other sports. So we're always producing content here. So once again, for our guest of the week and Daniel Yanofsky of The Sporting News, for my co-host Michael Shepard, I'm Danny Z. This is The Last Round.
Thanks for supporting and listening to the show. Follow us at The Last Round 12 on social media. Rate, review, and subscribe. This is The Last Round Podcast.